And this is why this actually looks better than this. Hello Wanderers, I know that many of you love Fallout 4 and The Witcher 3, but today's games are so amazing that we fail to notice how terrible they are. But I'm not here to tell you how they're horrible or bad, but to point out some core conceptual problems which are important and yet ignored by many players and as a consequence by the majority of industry representatives as well. And that's why I want to talk about plot or gameplay. These are just not the points of this video. Anyway, this journey will be a long one, so sit back and grab yourself a cup of tea, if you have one. First things first, what is an RPG? Well, as most of you already know, it's an acronym for a role-playing game, and according to Wikipedia, it's a game in which players assume the roles of characters, making decisions on their behalf. But actually, you're doing such things in every game. For example, here is a well-known game called Max Payne, and it's not an RPG, right? But you're playing here as Max Payne, obviously, and you're acting on his behalf. In other words, you're playing the role of Max from the first seconds of the gameplay, where you can make a decision to go right or left. Or you can even jump as a rat or hitting walls with your head, despite Max is actually hearing someone murdering his wife and child. And instead of trying to save them, he will do whatever you tell him to. And here's a question. Who is the one doing it? Max or you? Well, you see, the problem here is that Max Payne is a self-sufficient, autonomous character, and by that I mean that he seems to have his own personality, memories, past, goals in life, and he doesn't seem to know that he is controlled by someone. So why the hell some, let's say, a 12-year-old boy from Russia controls an NPC detective in his mid-30s? This can be a problem of interaction and self-identification with the avatar, but it isn't that crucial, because that is not what this game is about. It's much more about its gameplay, about having fun shooting people in slow-mo, and the main purpose of the story, the setting and its characters is to give you the reason to shoot people. Plus, if you get sucked enough into the flow of the game and its plot, it will be okay, because you will act alone, you will feel yourself being Max. And since the only decisions you make are where to shoot and where to hide from bullets, they won't change or break Max's character much, as long as you are acting alone, of course. And yet, if Max Payne is not an RPG despite you're playing the role of Max, then what an RPG really is? Well, seems like it's all about what the game is focused on. If Max Payne is focused on shooting people, open-world RPGs in turn are putting an emphasis on the fictional world, on the interaction with it, its dwellers, and of course your character development. So let's start with the world. If RPGs are focusing so much on it, then it better be cool, right? So what makes it cool? Well, it depends on how much that fictional world refers to ours. Here's an example. This is Botanicula. Its world looks abstract with all this pseudo-biology stuff going on. And the fact that this world has almost no references to ours allows it to be pretty much whatever it wants to be. But it also sacrifices realness, resulting in the losses of believability and self-identification. The act of immersion into the game of course will still have a place, but it will feel different. In other words, the less the world refers to ours, the more opportunities it has, but not without some sacrifices. It also serves as a great base for the coolest, the craziest or the most beautiful ideas. And if that's the case, all you need to succeed is a good implementation, at least in most of the cases. But if this fictional world refers to ours a lot, I mean, they are human, same laws of physics, etc., then it should play by its rules or explain why it doesn't. It's very important because it is what brings sense in it. This is what makes the connection between you, your world, and the fictional one. This world should be real, within itself at least, and believable. For example, The Matrix. You've seen that movie, right? But I'm gonna talk not about the movie here actually, but about its world, about the concept of its world. And it's great. It serves as a very good playground for all those crazy ideas and cool things like stopping bullets with the bare hands. And the thing is that despite its craziness, it's still real, much more real than you think, probably. Here's a fun fact for you. If we humans are able to create the Matrix, and we are getting really close to it by each day, it's inevitable, this will mean that it could have been created before, and there's a probability that we are inside of it right now. And it's not just like some fun theory, it's a real scientific, if you will, thing. Yeah, maybe you're in the Matrix in this exact moment, and proving it's wrong is pretty much impossible. Spooky, isn't it? So how does the world of Fallout 4 do? I don't really know where to start here, so let's just start from the beginning. During the cinematic intro we learn three things. First, the Fallout world exists in an alternate timeline that diverged from the real-world timeline after World War II, and the main difference is that they were using nuclear power for almost everything, even vehicles. So yeah, it clearly refers to our world. Second, that they somehow still managed to run out of oil, and this brought the world into the state of war. But the majority of oil consumption in our world is done by vehicles, and we are nowhere close to running out of oil in at least 90 years. Well, whatever. And the third thing we learned is that
war never changes.
You're gonna knock him dead at the Veterans Hall tonight, hun.
So it seems like some serious shit is going on here. Let's move on. The first seconds of the game are bringing some questions, like what the hell is it? How is this even possible? His name is Codsworth. He's clearly a robot, and he seems to be very advanced. I mean, he acts like a human, he even has emotions, and making such a thing requires very advanced technologies. But the problem is, how the hell in the world of such technologies a television set didn't evolve at all? And the answer to this question brings even more questions. You see, in our world, transistor was invented back in 1947, but in the world of Fallout it wasn't until 2067, and it seems to explain why TV did not evolve, but it also means that this super advanced robot was created without transistors. So it uses vacuum tubes instead. But it's just impossible. We in our world of transistors are nowhere close to making such an artificial intelligence. My son was stolen. What do I do?
I don't know how to respond to that.
Nice. And such a processing unit which is capable of mimicking human brain made of freaking vacuum tubes would be the size of a planet. And the energy consumption of such a thing per minute would be more than all of the energy humanity ever consumed. So we survived a nuclear war, and after sleeping in the cryogenic chamber for 200 years, we're back. And this is not how cryonics work, just saying. All that may sound like nitpicking for you, I know, but it is important, because that is what defines a good world design. Well, not in video games apparently. I will talk about this issue in detail, but not now. A bit later we find our house in what seems to be post-apocalyptic state, but actually it looks more like a post-tornado state, and totally not after 200 years. This is not how such a long period of time affects the world and everything in it, and it's not even close. Plus, so many things are just untouched, despite the place is populated by lots of humans, mutants, super mutants, etc. And this actually applies to the whole Commonwealth. This is what they call Massachusetts, I guess. Here we also find Codsworth, of course, who's still in one piece after 200 years. We also find out that he has a flamethrower with an infinite fuel. Maybe this is the answer to the question, how did humanity manage to run out of oil? I don't know really. By the way, our first enemies are gigantic insects, and they bring another question without an answer. The game tries to explain it with mutation, but you see, they just can't be that big. This is because of the way they breathe, and no mutation or 200 years of evolving can change that. And the only thing that can is the concentration of oxygen in the air. And even if that changed, they still cannot be this big. And these are only the first minutes of gameplay. And by that moment I realized that there is no point in asking questions anymore. But the thing is that exploration and interaction with the world are also about asking questions and getting answers. And even if you don't find an answer to some particular question, you still assume that it exists and you just can't reach it. Like in the real world. This is what makes a fictional world seem real. By referring to the real world, the game seems to let me apply my knowledge about it. For example, I'm a human living on Earth, and I know that if I jump, the force of gravitation will pull me back. That's why I can assume that the same thing will happen in the world of this game. But for some reason, the local world plays by the rules only when it wants to, and in most of the cases, it just doesn't. And not only it doesn't play by the rules of our world, even though it refers to it so hard, but it doesn't even play by its own rules. By the way, even the title of the game is a reference to a term in real physics. But actually, there are answers, they are just not within the world of the game, but within ours. Codsworth exists not because of some cool technology local scientists came up with, but just because developers thought it would be cool to have such robots in their game. And it applies to almost everything here. Why does this world look nothing even close to how it would really look considering conditions designers and developers put it in? Was it so hard to research it for multi-million project? Because sadly, we have such examples. The world would look way cooler and less cliché. Why the hell so many things are just untouched despite the world is being pretty much populated? All these skeletons in funny poses and amusing scenes telling us a story, all these items and valuables no one picked up, all of these were untouched just for one purpose: for player to find it in this state. And it's no way justified, despite it could have been. But no one cared. Those things are not natural components of the world, they are components of the game, added to make the local world more playable, more fun and balanced in terms of gameplay, etc. And yes, if the world of the game is not playable enough by itself, you can transform it a bit, add something, but this process of integration the playability into the world is complicated, and it can become a very challenging task, because all these added things can easily ruin this fictional world of yours, make it illogical, conflicting with itself, like the world of Fallout. And from a cool, interesting, believable, self-sufficient fictional kind of world, it will degrade into an unbelievable, trying to be fun, clearly created for the game and for players kind of world. And don't get me wrong here, the world doesn't necessarily have to be literally real with you considering the purpose of every little speck of dust in it, but it has at least to create an illusion of its being real. And that is the point. But in fact, it goes a bit deeper. You see, the Fallout world is an interpretation of the future envisioned by Americans back in 1950s. And in some ways it was deliberately made like this, putting an eclectic aesthetic and all this pseudo-science stuff in the center. And it could explain the existence of this robot somehow, but you see, pseudo-science can be cool. And if it was some cool, trashy, dynamic shooter which took only the aesthetic out of it, it would be cool. Or some action movie like Mad Max, which Fallout is frequently referring to. Mad Max is about getting fun out of the process, and it takes you 2 hours to experience all of these adrenaline bursts, crazy scenes and ideas. Max is mad, and the world of Mad Max is still much believable, by the way. But the problem is, Fallout 4 can take more than 100 hours and it's an RPG with extremely huge lore and background. For example, this robot. There is information about where it was created, what is the history of its creation, what companies developed it. There are also tons of information about these companies, etc. But why the hell I need to know all these tons of information about something I don't believe exists, when the most obvious thing I want to know is how the this thing works. And I believe that it's much more interesting than the name of the nuclear engine unit it uses. It's 238B, licensed from Calipower, if you were wondering for some reason. To make this whole thing more clear, let's have a look on the Dark Souls 2 world. And yeah, I'll be referring to this game a lot, and you may wonder, why would I refer to it instead of Bloodborne, which is a spin-off of Dark Souls and much more obvious competitor to these games I'm talking about today? Well, you see, I never finished it actually. My house went on fire with my PlayStation 4, and now I have some more apparent financial problems than buying another PS4. Oh, You don't wanna hear this story? So yeah, as I said before, if the game is referring to our world but doesn't play by its rules, it should explain why it doesn't, or justify it somehow. And the world of Dark Souls seems to refer to the real one, since it looks kind of like it. It has some similarities with our late Middle Ages, I guess. It has kind of humans in it. Then how could it end up being so mystical with all these creatures and all the magic going on? Well, first of all, the Dark Souls world isn't as real as it may seem. It has almost nothing in common with our world. Its nature and rules are totally different from ours from the beginning. All these humans are not even humans, actually. It's all kinda very abstract and extremely open to interpretations, and this can be used as excuses. And here, in a world creation, excuses are our friends, since it's exceedingly hard to create a world. So if something doesn't seem to fit in for you, this world will have an answer like, oh, you're taking it too literally, maybe it's just a metaphor for something. And yeah, this, by the way, is the most overused excuse for art movies. But it doesn't always mean that your world has to be extremely primitive and simple structured. The world of Dark Souls is pretty complex and has a deep lore, which is represented not through tons of text and hours of dialogues, but through the world itself. And it's self-sufficient and real. The world of Dark Souls doesn't need to be adjusted to be playable, because it was meant to be playable from the beginning. It's playable by its nature. The world has its rules, and everything in it follows these rules. And that's what makes it real. It's real within itself. The fact that the world is pretty abstract allows it to have the craziest designs of locations and there's inhabitants. You will never know what awaits you around the next corner. That's a great feeling and good motivation to explore the world. And all of this doesn't conflict with the rules of this world or its logic. Every little thing you can find here exists not without a reason, and it will be here no matter will you notice it or not. This is how the world works. Let me give you an example. This lodge in Majula, it's a bit suspicious, but well, for most of us it will be just a house with a map of the world. And it will do its basic functions. The game won't say much about this one, and for the most players, this is what it will remain to be. But actually, if you start researching it, exploring the world in attempts to understand what this house is, if you are smart and thoughtful enough, you'll end up astonished by how much this house actually means and how many things it brings into the local plot. And another interesting point is, it won't be the game telling you this story about this house through some text notes, it will be you trying to find out the truth by exploring the world, and this applies to almost everything in this game. And again, don't get me wrong, I don't mean that every boss in this game will tell you touching story. What I mean is that it will be there, not without a reason, which is given not by the designers of this game, but by the world itself. As I said before, the rules of the Dark Souls world differ from ours. You can explore the world trying to understand how it works. Many things will be unclear, you will end up with lots of theories and assumptions, knowing nothing for sure. But this is how the world is supposed to be, this is how our world works, and this is what the exploration is truly about. And what about Witcher 3? Well, it also has magic and mystic stuff in it, but unlike Dark Souls, it's actually much more realistic. It has real humans and also dwarves, elves, etc. Poor Tolkien. The Witcher world is also focused on Slavic mythology, which is cool and relatively fresh. I just wish they utilize it more. And yeah, the world of Witcher shares some problems with the world of Fallout, but much less. For example, all this magic stuff. Whereas Dark Souls is an abstract world of souls, Witcher's is pretty real, and it even has sciences as we do, like chemistry, medicine, biology, etc. There is a day and night cycle, which means that it's a planet. It seems to have same laws of physics, and all this magic stuff doesn't really fit in. It looks kinda cheap, I guess. I mean, if you are to put lots of magic in your realistic world, try to fit it in. So, first, better systemize it and make it submit to some rules. Second, the fact of existence of magic in the world affects it. so you need to think it through very well. Plus, if magic has been there for a long time, like in the Witcher world, you also have to consider it, because magic would affect the development of the world also. And I won't lie, sometimes it can be extremely hard. Third, by adding magic in a realistic world, you're sacrificing common sense and believability, so make it worth it. Bring some cool original ideas, make it look cool. So the first condition is meh, I guess. At least they tried. The second one is meh. And the third one is, well, here we got magic teleports, magic mind control, magic shields, and so on. I must admit, it's still pretty subjective. For some it's just a bad taste and cliché, and for others it's a canon. But the real problem is, well, you see, this game is based on the book, and in this book this exact world looks better, it's presented better, and I can understand Mr. Sapkowski saying that the game has nothing to do with his books, and it can't be considered as alternative version nor a sequel. And there are three main reasons for that. The first and the most obvious one is that the game wasn't created by the original author. The second one is, when you're dealing with imperfect world, it's very important to present it right, to focus on its strong points, and in book it's much easier to do it, because there is no interaction and no visuals. And that's probably why Mr. Sapkowski stated that his world can physically be integrated in the video game-like format. And the third one is that in the game the world of Witcher was adjusted to be more playable. And it would be fair to say that The Witcher 3 is dealing with it much better than Fallout 4 did. But the problem is, there is a book, and it may be okay if you just ignore the existence of the book and take the world of The Witcher in the game as the only one. But I don't think that this is the right thing to do, since not only the game is based on it, but it's also meant to be a chronological sequel to the book. And now let's talk about your integration into the game. You are immersing into the world through your character, and that is a very important process for RPGs. Let me explain. Before falling asleep, many of us used to dream, or still dreaming, about ourselves being a hero, saving the world. But your dream won't have much sense until you consider how you became Superman. It won't be you until you also dream about you getting beat by, let's say, little insect-like Superman. That's what will make you that Superman from your dream, and that is the connection between you laying in bed dreaming about stuff and another Superman you. Or, if you're a fan of fantasy worlds, you may want to be a part of it, so you dream about getting there. Like, maybe you'll just somehow wake up in that fantasy world tomorrow. And this will be your transition from you in this world to you in that fantasy world. These are very primitive examples, but I hope you got it. So here in Dark Souls, your protagonist is an empty vessel for your dark soul. Maybe this world is a metaphor for limbo or afterlife, who knows? So you can create yourself, play as yourself, and make your choices for yourself. Or you can create some ripped black dude, give him personality you want, and play the role of this black ripped dude. Unless you are a ripped black dude. So yeah, it's up to you here. But in The Witcher 3, as well as in Fallout 4, we are playing as an autonomous, self-sufficient characters. But unlike in Max Payne, here we make tons of much more vital decisions and choices than what gun to use in order to kill our enemies. And this is where another pile of problems is born. For example, in both games we have the advanced dialogue system, and should I make choices here on my behalf? For example, Geralt or Fallout 4 protagonist has been asked for an opinion on this situation. So should I give my opinion? But it doesn't make sense. Why does my opinion will be given by Geralt? He's a 202-year-old guy and totally different person, and what if this opinion of mine is not even on the list? And even if it is, there is no guarantee that that option will mean what I think it means. For example, Fallout 4 has this frequent option called sarcastic, and in most of the cases it will have nothing in common with an actual sarcasm, and even if I was Geralt, I'd probably use his mind control and magic every time I could, making everyone give me their money at least. it wouldn't always work, since that is the only logical explanation I found on why doesn't he use it all the time, but it's worth a try, right? So since all of it doesn't make any sense, maybe I should say what my character would say. And guess what? It actually makes even less sense. I mean, doesn't Geralt know his opinion better? It's his opinion after all. I do understand why it was done this way. Freedom of choice is a popular trend in modern video games, and it can be a great tool, but it's not the reason to put it in every game without even thinking. What is the point of all this freedom if instead of doing its job of immersing a player into the game, it does the opposite, destroying it and dancing on its ashes? Here we go. Another problem with this is that since we're not Geralt, it means that there are some things that Geralt knows and we don't, and vice versa. For example, Geralt may be asked about something from his past, but the problem is, unlike Geralt, I have no idea what I'm asked about. Maybe it happened in the first Witcher game, and I just don't remember it because it didn't have such an impact on my life as it did on Geralt's. That's why he still remembers it, and I don't. Or maybe it even happened off-screen, and it brings me to the point where I end up with no idea what should I say or what they're even talking about. And the same thing happens when in Fallout 4 I'm asked about my life before the war. And here is another example. So, at the moment Geralt is investigating another crime scene, and yeah, he often works as a detective here, and almost every time I was figuring things out much faster than he did. And it led to situations where I already knew the killer, but Geralt still was like, interesting, who could have done that? Or in Fallout 4, someone took protagonist's little child while he was in the cryogenic chamber. And since I know that protagonist was asleep for 200 years, and we don't know when exactly the child was stolen, I assume that probably this child isn't that little anymore. But protagonist didn't, and every time he was saying that he's looking for his little boy. And this led me to the feeling that I'm playing as some retards in both games. And yes, these are another bullets in the corpses of self-identification, common sense, and immersion into the game. In Dark Souls, we also have choices, and of course, it's nowhere even close to the number or variety of choices given us in Fallout 4 or The Witcher 3. Unlike those games, Dark Souls doesn't have that advanced dialogue system at all, so all these problems I've been talking about just don't exist in this game. Here we are speaking not through the dialogue system, but through our actions, of which we have full control. And I really like this approach, it does its job well, and I wish they would have utilized more. And that was the bottom line, by the way. We already talked about the worlds of these games and our interaction with protagonist, and now we can finally talk about interaction with the world through our protagonist. Here we can affect the world through killing enemies, talking to people, etc. In other words, in most of the cases we are interacting with the world through its dwellers, so let's talk about them. Generally, they perform their function of a crowd well. Like when you are looking at it zoomed out, it seems like villagers are living their lives, they're doing something, speaking about stuff, but this whole thing works only until you look just a bit closer. And when you do, all of this is going to fall apart and smash into pieces.
Whoa! Ours is a decent village. Think those plums are wreaking havoc on my gut. Ours is a decent village.
She was crying on the corpse of her loved one who was brutally murdered, and just in 1 second she won't even care about it. And after acting like a retard, she forgets about her husband and starts to mourn for some different building. And this whole sympathy for her loss is just gone, as well as believing in what you see. And these things happen almost every time. They're acting just so unnatural. This guy has just buried his demonic infant, and in 1 minute he won't even remember it, and will be happy to play cards with you. On the presentation of Fallout 4, Todd Howard was talking about that the freedom of choice is the most important thing they are focusing on, and that you can do whatever you want in their game, shoot whoever you want. But what is the point of this freedom of choices if in most of the cases these choices won't have any real consequences? I can massacre half the population of this town and no one will even care the other day. And some NPCs are just can't be killed because game finds them impotent. Then why does it give me the option to shoot them at all? Just to make it more absurd or what? Wouldn't it be better if they just remove half of the choices in the sake of making the left ones at least matter? Enemies, by the way, are also acting weird, especially in Fallout 4, where they won't see you crouching just in front of them. Or these wretched facial animations. Silent Hill 2, which came out 15 years ago, had better facial expressions despite that motion capture wasn't even used, because Team Silent knew how acting performance is important for characters. And now with all these advanced graphics, they just look and sound much more realistically than they act. Thankfully, there is a modification that fixes this problem in Fallout 4, but I didn't find one for The Witcher. CD Projekt cared so less that they have a same 3D model for different characters in the same exact quest line. And at some point, all these things are leading to the realization that you are interacting not with the dwellers of these worlds, but with the badly scripted bunches of code.
Why are you standing around here like there's nothing to do? Paladin Dance is waiting for you.
And don't get me wrong. Again, I don't say that all NPCs need to be real, with digitized human brain as their AI, which is actually a cool idea if you think about it. What I say is that the game has to create an illusion of all these things being real, and it all depends on how good this illusion is, how it looks. We finally made it to one of the most interesting topics here. How it looks is very important, and this is why older games actually dealt with it much better. And I'm talking about really old RPGs here, when sometimes you needed a paper user's guide to understand what you're seeing on the screen. And believe it or not, those games looked better, more realistic if you will, cause the game didn't show you the world, characters or action much. And the fourth wall was somehow broken, cause unlike modern games, nothing seemed to look real and it looked just as a game built of pixels. The game was more of just a core, container of rules and some conditions for you to follow. The real thing was happening inside your head, and for you it looked perfect. Because our imagination is our best personal graphic processing unit. NPCs often were just holders of some repeating phrases, and they were consisted of few pixels, but in your head they acted perfectly, they looked real for you. And battles were also more epic, no matter how absurd it sounds. Let's put it like this. You've beaten an extremely hard boss you couldn't defeat for weeks. And back in those days, you'd probably tell your friend about it. But the thing is, you wouldn't tell him how your bunch of white pixels destroyed a bunch of red pixels. Because this is not how you remember it. This is not what you experienced. For you, it was an epic battle, victory in which was so glorious. And to make such a game for you, designers only need to give you the right opportunities and tools for your abstract thinking. And now, when the game is moved from your head to the screen, demands to it are changed as well. And here's another big problem. While some components of games like graphics are evolving very fast, others are doing it very slowly or don't evolve at all. I'm talking about interaction aspects, artificial intelligence, some core concepts, scripts and stuff like this. And these more evolved components are conflicting with less evolved ones. And that's why I'm talking about RPGs today, because in RPGs this conflict is very clear. Talking about NPCs, Dark Souls is kind of trying to do it a bit like in those older games. They're all kind of static, they're also containers of some pieces of information and phrases, they don't even have any facial animations, and this was done on purpose, and obviously not because AAA title couldn't afford it. And they are like that because they are not human beings, but just a bunch of souls. They're abstract, their personalities are fading as well as their memories. And that's why enemies are also acting properly. They don't need digitized human brain to be what they are. Their artificial intelligence is enough for them to be self-sufficient, to act as they have to act. And the only one somehow living creature in this world is you, and players like yourself. Plus, since you are your protagonist, the game can interact with you directly here, through the item descriptions like in old games. And I really don't want to be misunderstood here. I'm not trying to say that Dark Souls is perfect and Witcher 3 and Fallout 4 are just pieces of shit. Of course, Dark Souls has its bad sides, and of course I had some fun playing Fallout and Witcher. And all these games I've been referring to this whole video were just tools to show you these problems we have in the modern video game industry. So why any of these are important after all? Well, you see, games are art. And it's complicated kind of art, like movies, where different forms of art are connected to make a final product. But unlike movies, games are also an art of interaction, but sadly in most of the cases they are treated not seriously, and as a very low art in all kind of aspects. And that's not a bad thing for some games, which are meant to be like that, conceptually simple, because being a low art by itself is not really a bad thing. It becomes bad when some conceptually complicated games like RPGs are treated the same way, ignoring so many important things, which RPG emphasizes as genre. There are reasons for that, but I don't want to offend anyone or make this video 3 times longer, but people are happy with that also. And that applies not only to players, crappy critics or corrupt reviewers. IGN, I'm sorry. But to academics as well. And I find it kind of sad, because they are the ones who have to take into account all this conceptual and designing stuff. And in the film industry in turn, academics are trying to do their job. They don't give an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay to Avengers for obvious reasons. Because movies and video games are both not only art, but also industry. And in movies, academics are trying to keep it as art. They make this industry, at least some parts of it, emphasize the right things. And there are enough consumers who are grateful for that, cause they are taking it seriously. That's why we still have not only amusing, fun, action or comedy movies, but also good movies, if you will. And both of them can be great. But in the video game industry it seems like local academics just choose the most popular games, because no one really cares. Gamers got used to all these things. They don't see these problems. Actually, I even conducted a little experiment showing those games to people who are not into video games, and most of them were confused about the same things I've been talking about here. And most of attempts to evolve are made by indie games, but sadly indie games are indie. And most of them are just poorly created shit. Some of them are trying hard to be something cool and fresh. But even if their ideas are great, in most cases their low budgets aren't enough to fulfill them. And only few succeed. But still, they're not AAA titles like Fallout or The Witcher. So yeah, we have some problems here and I wanted to show them to you. To make you notice them. Because it seems like games won't really evolve as long as consumers are okay with what they consume. And I don't say that we need to create diamonds only. I'm just trying to say that the whole game industry could be so much better. And there are good examples already. So yeah, this is where our journey ends. I hope you found something interesting here, some thoughts maybe. I hope you liked it, and if you did, you can subscribe to this channel or maybe even share this video, it will help me a lot. The next video will release sometime in June, at least I hope so, and thank you for watching.